Lionel Herkaby is one of the most beloved and recognizable characters of the show, who, despite arriving 2 seasons late, really seems like he was tormenting Malcolm throughout the entire show. The curious thing is that, despite the little details we get to know about his story, by the time he mysteriously disappears in Season 7, when Malcolm defends Reese, the truth is that much about him is still unknown. In his first appearance in the episode Emancipation, it's revealed he was a Krellboyne as a child due to his intellect, holds 2 Harvard doctorates, briefly became a millionaire, but lost it all after starting an internet company. Now he only has $137 to his name, and he ended up teaching in the same class as Malcolm, with whom he developed an unhealthy fixation, seeing a reflection of his own intellect, to the point that he requests to be transferred from elementary to middle school just to keep being Malcolm's teacher. But interestingly, among the few facts that we have clear, there is a detail that never comes up or is mentioned again at any point in the series, something that he doesn't even mention directly, but the show makes an effort for us to notice. During that very first appearance, the Krill Boys try to learn every detail about their new teacher to impress him, which gives us this scene.
Lionel Herkaby, born on July 8, 1963, parents John and Ida.
Yes, parents John and Ida. Even though the name John is extremely common, Ida is not only a bit more unique, but we only know one person with that name in this series, Malcolm's grandmother. Click the link in the description so you don't miss this great offer. To begin, I need to mention 2 details that you must be thinking about from the scene. First, Malcolm read this information, and in theory, he should have recognized all of this in case Herkaby really was his relative. And second, Herkaby claims to have been born in 1983, the same year Lois was born. And with only 5 months difference between them, the biological details of their birth become complicated. Usually we don't start with the holes in the theory, but for now, I'll ask you to keep them in mind while we analyze other things. First, it's necessary to highlight some of the deeper connections that exist between Lois and Herkaby, which reinforce a crazy theory called, to be honest, it comes from just one piece of dialogue. First of all, Herkaby might sound like a strange last name, and that's because apparently it was invented for the show, with no real person online bearing that last name. The curious thing is that the closest thing in our world is Herbax, a Polish last name that has existed since the 14th century. This is incredibly important because even though the idea that Lois comes from an immigrant family has been played with, the country she comes from is incredibly vague, and it has never been fully confirmed, just like other details in the show. It seems that her mother, Aida, is Slavic or from Eastern Europe, and we say this not only because of her background full of economic hardship and military presence, but also because of the traditional costumes, expressions, and national holidays. All of that, combined with the real-life heritage of the actress who plays Lois, coming from a Polish family. So our main candidates are Croatia, Liechtenstein, and Poland, places that fit perfectly with the last name of Lionel Herkaby. This is not the only point where family heritage becomes evident. You might be familiar with the idea that all the siblings in the family possess intelligence in different areas. This theory also has a less discussed aspect. This intelligence appears to be inherited from the mother's side. Let's remember that Lois is an intelligent woman in the field of literature, even surpassing Malcolm in this area depending on the episode.
What is your homework about, son? It's a summary of Wuthering Heights. Wuthering Heights. I did my final paper on that. That's not true. I hope you don't use the overused approach that Kathy and Heathcliff are soulmates. Did you notice the subtle hostility towards romanticism? Kathy is as attached to Edgar as to Heathcliff, even taking a lock of his hair to the grave. I already knew that.
And I mean, both Lois and Malcolm are very similar toxic people. They always think they're right and that their will should always be followed. And they even present themselves as the most reasonable person in the room when they have to solve problems, even if they suggest outrageous ideas. These are behavior patterns born from an upbringing full of pressure, with several of these details being shared by Herkaby himself. In fact, their teaching styles couldn't be more similar. Lois and Herkaby are people who, although intelligent and overqualified for the jobs they currently have, are disillusioned with the way their lives have turned out. And their teaching methods are based on humiliation, excessive punishment, and competition, with the aim of knocking the kids they deal with down a peg and the idea of showing them how tough life is out there. And as a bonus, they usually don't react properly to confrontation, which makes Malcolm respond in the only way he knows, rebelling against them, a level of similarity that's almost suspicious. In fact, we know that both of them had a tough past, full of expectations and difficulties, which is why now they make Malcolm the scapegoat they'll spend the rest of their lives blaming. In the case of Herkaby, he wants to teach Malcolm to unleash his true potential, so he doesn't get stuck the same way he did, and can become a billionaire through pressure, at least at first. Or there's Lois, who wants the same thing, but for her son to become president. Huge, over-the-top expectations. Another detail to consider is that, except for Ada, the series really doesn't repeat names, or it does so as little as possible. So taking the name of a character that already existed from the previous season, and especially choosing such an uncommon one, makes the situation go from curious to quite suspicious. Even if you ignored everything I've said so far, we still haven't discussed the most important thing. Aida, who has the strangest story in the whole series, and although I don't have solid proof, I'm almost sure she's the incarnation of Satan. I'm not exaggerating when I say that, because her deeds range from drugging a rich Chinese man to having a slave with whom she was going to force Reese to marry. All with a level of racism that rivals that of the fans of a certain orange man. FBI, open up. Aida shows all the signs of a ruthless woman who would stop at nothing to achieve wealth, to the point of hating an entire family over $43. It must have been from her that these demands, under which both siblings, quote-unquote, grew up, must have come from her. And at least we know one side of the story. Lois was constantly compared to her sister Susan, who was not only seen as more successful and of a better class, but also Lois. She always lived with the idea that she was weak, lazy, or directly to blame for Susan never finding a husband because she stole Hal from her. In fact, Victor repeated several of the same toxic behaviors of preferring Susan over Lois, to the point that he only came back after abandoning Ada because of his love for Susan. But it seems that it wasn't an unfounded hatred, because Ada and Victor had a very small problem, and that was that they couldn't stop cheating on each other. In the episode Victor's Other Family, we're introduced to the idea that, while Aida was upset because Victor had gotten involved with another woman named Sylvia, she started dating a guy named Radu Gogorski, a possibility the episode toys with. The idea that he could be Lois's biological father is left ambiguous, since Ada might have just made up the guy to torment Lois. Also, in another episode, we see a photo of Victor when he was young, looking incredibly similar to Francis, so in my opinion, Victor is the father. But that doesn't change the fact that Victor had a second family in Manitoba, which Ada knew about, and on the other hand, both of them kept cheating on each other for years as if it was nothing. Which brings us back to Hercule. Under these circumstances, it sounds very likely that after that period of crazy infidelities, Ada ended up pregnant by another man. And even though the boy was registered, she decided to send him to his unknown father so that Ada could stay with Victor, thus giving birth to Susan, the perfect daughter of the perfect marriage. This not only gives us enough time for both Lois and Susan not to remember their brother, but it's exactly the kind of petty and underhanded action these two would take just to make their lives a little easier. All of this sparked Hercule's desire for self-improvement, arrogance, and insecurity. Since he came from such a difficult childhood, he must have thought that both his intellect and his success were things he deserved. After growing up abandoned, it made him hyper-competent, but at the same time, it fed the ego that would be the source of that fateful decision that left him as an elementary school teacher at an average school. Even there, we can see that denial about his own guilt. In his presentation, he seems to blame the system that raised him for his failure and the expectations of others, and that everyone is stupid except him, rather than making him more sensitive and admitting he may have made a poor business decision. As for the years, the wiki says that Lois was born in 1963, but honestly, that doesn't make any sense. For example, even though Susan is always portrayed as the younger sister, she says she was born in 57, which would mean Lois was born before that, and this 1963 thing is a blatant lie. So it seems obvious that the writers were never that strict with the dates. With this point disproved, and confirming that everything points to Lois being born before Herkaby, it's time to move on to the next point against this theory. Why, if Malcolm and Herkaby are so smart, did they never notice it? Well, that question has a flaw because it seems that they actually did. Quoting a TV Tropes article about the theory, Malcolm and/or Herkaby may have even realized this at some point. That's why they become more and more competitive as the series goes on. They're jealous of each other's lives. For Malcolm, Herkaby is someone who wasn't ruined by Ada's influence and succeeded by his own standards. being incredibly rich even if he lost everything, as a result of not being harmed by this kind of upbringing. For Herkaby, Lois was raised in a way that allowed her to have a happy and stable marriage and family even if they were dysfunctional, while his own marriage ended in a divorce that he still seems to resent, as well as a stable job, although poorly paid, while Herkaby has a debt of millions of dollars. In the end, the struggle between him and Malcolm isn't about being better than others or about insignificant disputes over grade point averages. It's about outdoing the other to prove their own worth and that of their families, something they never admit because they think the other doesn't know, but they can't get over it. This new angle on envy presents some basic, quite interesting ideas to watch the show with. Well, episodes like Malcolm Records Reese show that Herkaby seems to have a strange obsession with Malcolm's family. I mean, the fact that Malcolm is made to record Reese, besides being a very strange exercise in humiliation directly focused on that family, is weakly justified by Herkaby saying it was to recreate the Milgram experiment. But why would he do it by recording the family of one of his students if he doesn't have any other motive? A motive like, in this case, a sick obsession with the family that he might have had. Which leaves us with one last question. Why doesn't Malcolm ask or tell Lois? Well, in the series, we see that Malcolm has a strong connection with his mother, so we can argue that he prefers to keep his connection with Herkaby a secret to protect her. In this way, when Herkaby is eventually humiliated so brutally that we never see the guy again in the show, Malcolm is also rejecting the man he could have become without his mother. A possible future version focused only on success and nothing else, concluding that yes, Malcolm is not perfect, but it's better than being a resentful, failed, obsessive, and angry person like Herkaby. So, I hope you enjoyed this theoretical video. Like the video if you did, subscribe for more videos like this, and I'll see you in the next video, which we'll probably upload along with that revival that promises to be anything but normal. Goodbye!